So I want to introduce Nina right now. Nina Chordas is a professor at University of Alaska Southeast. She has been there since 2002. She earned her PhD in English from the University of Oregon, specializing in literature of the Renaissance. So that's just what we're talking about tonight. It's a perfect fit. She frequently teaches courses on Shakespeare and Renaissance literature. And having grown up in a Russian-speaking family, she's also interested in Russian and Soviet scholarship on Shakespeare and the Renaissance. Professor Chordas was one of our supporting scholars for this grant, and without her support, we would not have the First Folio here today. So thank you so much, and thank you for talking with us about Romeo and Juliet.
Thank you, Claire, for that introduction. I was very happy to write in support of this exhibit, so I'm really happy Juneau got it. So we are talking about Romeo and Juliet tonight, and I'm going to kind of not do it without notes, so if I'm rambling a little, please excuse me. I think my slides are going to tell me more or less what I'm talking about, so, and then we'll have question and answer afterwards. So most of you are probably very, very familiar with this story because most of us probably read it in maybe as far back as junior high, middle school, if not high school. I know that I think we did, and so I sometimes tell my students, okay, spoiler alert, they die. So, but everybody knows the story. It's so famous. I probably don't have to recap it. This photo, the still here, is from Franco Zeffirelli's 1968 film version of Romeo and Juliet. How many of you have seen that one? Almost everybody here. It's so iconic. So I have a little story about, I was 15 years old when it came out. And my boyfriend, my high school boyfriend, and I went to see it, and we clutched hands through the whole thing and wept in each other's arms when it was over. So I kind of have a soft spot for it. So here they are. It's a very lush and reverent production. I love it. Okay. And of course, there are very, very many versions of Romeo and Juliet. There's other film versions, there's stage versions. This is a poster for a stage version with Derek Jacobi, Lily James. Not sure who Richard Madden was. Mercutio probably is my guess. But anyway, so there's lots. I have little quotes from it. My only love sprung from my only hate. That's probably not what she's saying in this scene. But I think she says it before all this. Anyway, where am I? Okay, another very iconic sort of production is the Baz Luhrmann Romeo and Juliet that came out in 1996, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes. And this, as you can see, they have guns, not swords. It was updated to kind of a more modern version, like two houses, that from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, but this was kind of like a gangsta thing. There were gangs, actually. And it was set in Verona Beach. And as you can see, there are the big towers. It's not Trump Towers, it's Montague and Capulet Towers in the back. It was really interesting. Now this is the version that we got to see when I was in junior high. This is Leslie Howard and Norma Shearer in 1936. And she looks young to me kind of now, because I think I'm older than she was. But when I was 13, she looked old, and so did he. They did not look like Romeo and Juliet. I remember the class laughed when she stabbed herself. I don't know if it was her emoting or if it was, or just the fact that it just was, we couldn't relate. So that's why the Zeffirelli version was such a breath of fresh air when it came out. And of course, there are ballet adaptations. This is Margot Fonteyn and Rudolf Nureyev with in London, dancing, of course, Tchaikovsky's score. And there's an opera, too. I mean, there's tons of things. This is, I had to get one Russian slide in. I don't really have any Russian info on Romeo and Juliet, but this is Vladimir Shklyarov and Yevgenia Obraztsova at the Mariinsky, which is in St. Petersburg, dancing Romeo and Juliet. So very, very famous story. Okay, so now I'm going to put on my academic hat. And we're going to back up to Francesco Petrarca, known as Petrarch, who was writing in the 1300s in Italy. How many of you have heard of him? Okay, a few of you have, so sorry if I'm repeating old stuff, but this has a lot of bearing on Romeo and Juliet, actually. Petrarch was actually a contemporary of Chaucer. So that's how far back he's a couple hundred years before Shakespeare, and he is famous for writing he spent 30 years writing a sonnet sequence for a woman with whom he had fallen in love, but whom he didn't really know her. Her name was Laura, and he wrote these beautiful poems to her in Italian. This is a time period when most scholarly or academic or the way you communicate with people in other countries is in Latin, and Latin is sort of the language of learning. It's the official language, but he was writing in Italian, in the vernacular, and these are beautiful poems, sonnets, and exploring his anguish. And he spent 30 years being in love with this woman that he could never attain, A, because she was married to someone else, and then B, she died somewhere in the middle of his sequence. So he was then writing to someone who was no longer even in this world. But his poems established a lot of conventions that kind of came back into vogue in the 1590s in Western Europe for a variety of reasons that scholars still kind of debate about. But everybody was writing sonnet sequences. It was a fad. And these sonnet sequences were characterized by certain, please come in, have a seat. These sonnet sequences all had certain characteristics that were fairly common to all of them. And one of which was it was a male poet expressing his love, desire, admiration toward a love object who was conventionally unattainable. Her job is to say no. His job is to persuade her by any means possible. In poetry, her job is to say, no way. And so it became kind of, like I said, it becomes a convention, and there's other things associated with it, one of which is Petrarchan oxymorons. These turn up in Petrarch's poetry. They turn up in Romeo and Juliet as well. You have to do this right. Oh, living death. Oh, delightful harm. Oh, sweet torment. I shiver in midsummer, burn in winter, right? Icy fire. And these last are from Romeo and Juliet. Dear enemy, beautiful tyrant, fiend angelical. This is what Juliet calls Romeo after he kills her cousin, because she's in love with him. So she knows these conventions too. It's not, even though it's a male discourse, it's men talking to other men for the most part, but the women are all aware of this, so it's kind of interesting. I don't know why her picture isn't showing up. That's something with the probably interface between, let's see. No. Well, this was a portrait in mine of, it was a Leonardo Da Vinci portrait of Ginevra de' Benci, and she, if you look at the little, the words below, eyes like diamonds, lips like rubies, cheeks like roses. This is part of the Petrarchan convention that you know, the woman has certain please feel free to come in. The woman has certain characteristics that are kind of predictable and very conventional. So you have, you know, you guys all know them. You know them. You've heard them all. You know, her lips are, they're not rubies, they're cherries. You know, her cheeks are like roses. Her neck is like a swan. Her breast is alabaster. Her, you know, her hair is, you know, it's, please come on in. There's some seats over here. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to move on since that, maybe the rest of them are gone. Oh my gosh. Claire, is there any way we can recover this? I think it's the I made these on a Mac. Oh, here we go. It came up. How weird.
Well, but that's text. Sorry, folks.
Technology. Wow, I wonder if it's... I wonder...
Well, let's just try to open it again.
Okay, we're going to try opening it again. It's ain't technology grand. Does it say, are we doing slides?
No, for some reason, it must just,
Yeah.
maybe it's the image type, but...
How weird, because it's the same. Are we in slideshow? Does that make any difference?
I don't think so.
Because it worked last time. It's
Yeah.
weird. All my images, how come it was working before? And then it suddenly disappeared.
Let's try to go ahead and pull this out, and we should have run through the whole slideshow, I guess.
Sorry about that. They were here. Now they're gone.
Oh, hateful electronics.
Oh, hateful electronics.
That time it opened.
Oh, there she is. Let's have her
That's
back.
crazy.
Oh, there she is. Ginevra.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. All right. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Well, there she is. This is a Da Vinci portrait. So apparently the portrait was commissioned by, it's one of the Bembos, I don't remember which one, who saw her and fell in love with her at first sight, even though he was way older than she was, and she was married to someone else. But commissioned this portrait of her. But you can see she kind of has that almost cold look. But look at those, you know, the golden hair, the curls, you know, and the, yeah, so she's this Petrarchan beauty. Yes, this is the Sweet Torment. Romeo, this is Leonard Whiting in the Zeffirelli production. So these conventions become so cliche. By the time the sonnet sequence craze is going, Shakespeare was kind of a latecomer to it, but he wrote his own sonnet sequence. I'm sure you all have seen many of these poems. Sonnet 130 actually satirizes these cliches. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hair be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. My students like that line. And it goes on. But he can do this because everybody knows what the conventions are. So it becomes funny. Of course, though, he protests how much he loves her anyway, even though she's not a goddess. She's a very mortal being. So this is, again, the Zeffirelli version. This is Olivia Hussey and the nurse. And the nurse, I wrote her name down. Her name is, did I write her name down? I wrote it down on my slide. Haywood, Pat Haywood. So the thing with Romeo and Juliet that really kind of drives the action in the play is that they break a lot of the conventions that have grown up around expectations of what love is going to be like or how people are going to express their love. They certainly break the Petrarchan kinds of conventions. The thing with the Petrarchan sonnet sequence kind of puts the woman on a pedestal. She's unattainable. She is adored. She's described. She's worshipped even. The Catholic Church had problems with Petrarch's poetry. They tried to gloss it as actually being about the soul and the soul's yearning to be united with Christ in the church, but it was about Laura, this woman that he was in love with, and it was a very personal kind of odyssey that he was on, writing these sonnet sequences. But actually, it's a very male discourse. The woman is idealized. She's described almost like a series of body parts in some ways. Her eyes, her lips, her cheeks, but the actual woman herself doesn't really say anything ever. She's at the same time, she has power over the languishing, adoring male poet because she can rescue him from this anguish. She can, say, okay, yes, and relieve his sweet torment and, pluck him out of the icy fire. And but her role is to be, the conventional role is to be unattainable, right? At the same time, so she has power, but power should not be equated with agency. Women in this time period had very little agency. Most marriages, especially the higher up you go in social rank, are still dynastic. The higher you go on the social scale, the less leeway there is to choose your own partner. A lot of the marriages are still arranged. They're intended to consolidate families and property and things like that. So we see Juliet in this play. She's very much part of that dynamic. We see her centered in her family. She is this is before the party where she meets Romeo, this particular scene. We learn about her childhood quite a bit through her nurse and the conversation her nurse and her mother have about her. So we kind of see her as a real human being. She's not this cold, sort of distant figure on a pedestal. She's a very human girl. We learn she's young. She's not even 14 yet. That's why Norma Shearer is so wrong. But she's so young, and at the same time, she's being groomed for marriage. Her mother says the County Paris has come wooing you. He's come asking about your hand in marriage, and so Juliet will be supposedly introduced to him at this fete that they're having that evening. And I know you all know this story. Of course, Romeo and his friends crash the party, and Romeo and Juliet meet. They actually exchange words. They actually, and very famously, speak a sonnet between them. If you count the lines, 14 lines. that defines the sonnet. There's other things, but so in that sense, they're transgressing. I mean, they meet without an intermediary. They're not introduced to each other. They run into each other. That's so modern. You say, oh yeah, I ran into him at a party. Wow, you didn't do that in those days, but they do, and it's instant love. It's like love at first sight, and we still talk about that. It's a real phenomenon. We probably have all experienced it. I often ask my students, when Cupid aims his arrows, where is he shooting? What does he aim at? Well, and they all say, well, he aims at your heart. No, he aims at your eyes. Cupid's darts enter through your eyes, and then they work their way down. But it's love. That's what happens. Love at first sight. So this is Claire Danes in the Baz Luhrmann version of the film. The balcony scene is probably the most famous scene in Romeo and Juliet. I mean, everybody knows lines from it. But wherefore art thou, Romeo? When she comes out onto the balcony, she thinks she's alone. She has no idea that, of course, that Romeo is lurking in the garden, and he sees her come out. Oh, what light through yonder window breaks! It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. But she thinks she's alone. And so the words she speaks are things that are not meant for him to hear. She's not supposed to say the things. She should take, to get rid of your name, and for your name, which is no part of you, take all myself. Well, she's not supposed to say these things. The Petrarchan mistress would never say anything like that. But he hears her. And so when he confronts her and she realizes that he's there, well, she's thrilled, of course, he's there, but at the same time, she's very much appalled that he's heard her, that he's overheard her say things that she's not supposed to say. She tells him, she says, I know the mask of night is on my face, else would a maiden blush bepaint my cheek for that which thou hast heard me speak tonight. Fain would I dwell on form. I wish I could go by the book. I wish I could dwell on the form. When she says that, she means the Petrarchan conventions. Fain deny what you heard me say. She wishes she could deny it because that's what she's supposed to do. She's supposed to be perverse, and she says, then I'll be perverse and say thee nay. If you want me to, we'll back up and pretend you never heard me, and I will do what I'm supposed to do, and I'll say no, but it's too late. So instead they are, they're young. They decide they're going to get married, and of course, the interesting thing is that if you compare the characters, if you look at the characters in this play, Juliet is really a stronger character than Romeo in many, many ways. As far as she's the one who pulls a lot of the strings, even though she's a woman, and conventionally the woman would not have so much say-so in what's going on, but she's the one who gets him. She makes him promise that he'll marry her on the balcony there. And, she even says, I'll send someone to you tomorrow to figure it all out. And she does. She sends her nurse in the morning, and they set the date and the time. And they do. They get married without her parents' knowledge, without going outside that family dynamic. These families are feuding. So, right, this is the Hatfields and McCoys scenario. So, and yet she's the one who really instigates this and makes sure that it happens. And that's very unusual. So in some ways, Juliet resembles a lot of Shakespeare's comic heroines, the ones who cross-dress and run away and do cool things in the Forest of Arden and stuff like that. So it's very interesting. Tybalt. Yes. This is Michael York in the Zeffirelli film version. Very handsome guy. Tybalt and Juliet obviously are very close. She's heartbroken when Romeo kills him. And the street brawl that he instigates, Romeo tries to avoid it. But in that street brawl, of course, Romeo's friend Mercutio is killed, and then Romeo, in a heat of rage, kills Tybalt. Which kind of leads to the crisis. I mean, I think the wedding would have been a crisis, but now you have this murder, the double murder, right? And Romeo is banished. The prince, the families are there, and as the prince says, who now the price of his dear blood doth owe? Because he said, whoever sheds blood again forfeits his life. So now who owes their blood? And Romeo's father said, not Romeo, he says. He slew Tybalt. Tybalt slew Mercutio. So Romeo just completed what the law would have done. And for that, Romeo, good argument. I don't know if it would hold up in court, but the prince banishes Romeo, right? So Romeo has to leave. So Romeo and Juliet have one night together. They consummate their wedding, their marriage, and then he has to leave before the break of day. And that precipitates, of course, the rest of the tragedy. Juliet goes to Friar Lawrence because, of course, her father decides she should marry Paris right then and there, and she can't marry him. This is really a very delicate situation that she's in, of course, because she's lying to her parents, have no idea that she's actually secretly married to somebody, the son of their worst enemy, no less. But the other thing is her immortal soul is in jeopardy here. She can't marry Paris without committing adultery. And when her nurse advises her to forget Romeo and marry Paris, that's when Juliet feels completely abandoned. And that's when you see her kind of pull herself together and resolve that she goes to Friar Lawrence and says, I cannot marry Paris. And he comes up, of course, with the scheme of giving her the poison that will make her seem dead. And then while she's in the Capulet vault, he'll send word to Romeo, and Romeo will come and bear her away. They'll leave Verona. And, of course, it doesn't work out that way. Everyone knows what happens. There's no spoilers here, right? But part of this, I think the dynamic here is that, there it is, the death scene in the Zeffirelli version. Okay, Romeo's already dead. That's Juliet taking her life. So in a way, the whole story comes out because they're both discussed. Of course, Romeo has killed Paris too at the tomb because Paris has been grieving. He was apparently in love with Juliet, or he considered her his future wife. So he's there when Romeo arrives. Romeo gets word that Juliet is dead. So he never gets the message that Friar Lawrence has sent by another friar that would have told him what's really going on. He just gets a message that she's dead. And so he buys the poison and takes the poison. And then she, of course, wakes up just shortly after that. So shortly after that, she says, "Thy lips are warm" when she kisses them. It's so sad. This is a sad play. It's also a very lyrical play. Some of the most beautiful lines are in this play. And so then, of course, there's the reconciliation between the families at the end. Supposedly, at least Zeffirelli, they reconcile. Yes. So that is pretty much it. If anyone has questions about anything that I've touched on, I will
Do the families not reconcile in some of the
There's I think the prince speaks. He says he's going to talk to the family. The implication is yes, that they will put an end to the feud. Yeah. See what a scourge is laid upon your hate, that heaven finds means to kill your joys with love, the prince says. All are punished. Yeah. So, So, I think the implication is that the feud is over.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Well, you mentioned Petrarch, but is there another older story that Shakespeare drew this director from, or did he make it up?
Oh no, he didn't make it. I don't think it's funny, but I don't know if he ever made up any of his plots. He borrowed a lot of, this is an older story that had been circulating around, and I don't know its full genealogy, but it's really true. The one thing Shakespeare tends to do with his source material is embellish it in very creative ways. So, Comedy of Errors, for example, in the original Plautus comedy, there's only one set of twins, and he lets there be two sets of twins. And I think Theater in the Rough is reading Comedy of Errors on Saturday, if I'm not mistaken, but that is a fun play, so I encourage people to go hear it. So, yeah, but no, he didn't make this one up either. So. Any other? Yes. This play was written in the 1590s. It's pretty early, and I think it's been one of his most popular plays from the beginning. How could you not? It's got this young love, but remember, Juliet was played by a boy in Shakespeare's theater, so and that maybe complicates things. Start thinking about these. At least she's not cross-dressing like some of the others do. Anything?
What do you think of the friar's plan? I think it's the dumbest idea. It's like when I was in high school and forgot all about it. He's like, dude, that is a stupid plan. Pretend you're dead.
Let's pretend. Well, it's fun. That's true. He's set up though. Shakespeare does a really good foreshadowing thing, because he's shown when we meet the friar in the first scene that we meet him in, he's out gathering herbs, because he's an herbalist. He knows how they work and he uses them. And his whole speech is about how some of them are beneficial, how some of them are poisonous, and how some even beneficial ones, if you take too much of them, can be detrimental. And so you kind of know that's his thing, right? He knows his herbs, so he's maybe it's logical that that's what he would think of. But I agree with you. It's a pretty risque kind of plan, and it depends on a lot of things going right. Like, first of all, she can't wake up until they've quote unquote buried her, but interred her in the family vault, and so very, very precarious. I agree.
Well, the other thing is, he was committed. He'd married the two.
That's right.
So he's got to cover his own.
That's true. He has to cover himself as well as them. And he also talks about he has a desire to reconcile the families. And that's why he agreed to marry them. He agrees to marry them because he thinks that this will be an impetus for the families to actually make peace. And, of course, he never dreams that what's going, the fight and the murders and the banishment and all the rest of it. So that's why it's a tragedy. Everything goes wrong. So... What was the feud? We don't know. It's almost like when Baz Luhrmann sets his film in Verona Beach, and you have these kind of gangster people. They're almost like gangsters. They're the first opening scene is the two gangs, the rival gangs, meeting and taunting each other.
Well, West Side Story
was based on Romeo and Juliet, yeah. So it transposes itself very well. So, but we don't know what started it. What started the Bloods and the Crips? You like red and I like blue. This is my turf and this is yours. I don't know. I mean, that's, a lot of times these things get lost, and or it's turf wars, or who knows. So, yeah. Any other questions, comments, insights?
At the end of this, neither of the families have an heir.
That's right.
You know,
Yes.
the family can't continue.
That's very interesting, because, you know, Tybalt is also dead, and he's the cousin. So that's a very good point. In a way, they expended their lineage in this feud, and I'm not sure what would happen next, but that's interesting. Yeah. So good comment. And anything else? Not? Well, thank you all for coming, and please enjoy the reading. Theater in the Rough has done a wonderful, wonderful job reading their way through all these plays. I don't know if you haven't had a chance to do this before, they're excellent. And please do fill out the forms, because it's good for us to report back to the Folger on the grant. So thank you all very much for coming.